Om Shri Sai Ram, with loving pranams at the lotus feet of Bhagwan Shri Sathya Sai Baba. Welcome to the Shri Sathya Sai Media Center's Satsang session. Our guest today is Ms Janani Srinivasan. Janani Srinivasan comes from a family of Sai devotees. Bhagwan was the family deity for the Srinivasan family well before Janani was born. Her father, Professor Srinivasan, was appointed by Bhagwan Baba as the head of the physics department at the Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning in 1983, where he continued to serve till 2002. Janani did her entire schooling at the Sri Sathya Sai Higher Secondary School, Prasanthi Nilayam, and completed her grade 12 in 1996. Thereafter, Janani Srinivasan pursued her BSc at Bangalore University and her MBA at the Rotman School of Management in Toronto, Canada. She served at a leading Canadian bank for 17 years. Currently, Ms Janani Srinivasan resides in Princeton, New Jersey in the United States. Sai Ram Janani, and welcome to the Sri Sathya Sai Media Center.
Sai Ram, it's a great pleasure to be here.
And it's good to have you.
Thank you very much.
You joined Swami's school in 1984, an impressionable young 6-year-old. When you look back in hindsight, what is the landscape that comes to mind?
So there's this book, Adventures in Sai Wonderland, this Adventures of Frankie. So the Puttaparthi of that era was very much like that. The darshan ground that you see today was filled with this beautiful sand. And it was a very magical place because Swami would walk along the sand and we would try to, his footprints would be on the sand and we'd collect it right after the darshan. And because we believed that the sand had curative properties. And it was a great thing for us. And as children, particularly myself, being quite a naughty kid, my parents had a room, I believe it was SA 17, right behind the Joy ice cream stand by the badam tree. And I used to kind of constantly be running around. And my abiding memory of that time is my grandmother. She used to cut a very distinctive figure. We're a typical Tam-Ram family, and my grandmother was part of our family. And she would be in her 9-yard sari. And, she would kind of be chasing me around. I think it was the tulsi thing that was there. That's still there, right?
Yes, behind the mandir.
Yeah, and I had this propensity for running around. And it was just this... It had this whole, like this big playground kind of a feel because there's sand everywhere and, you could kind of use this sense that there's an ice cream stand right there. And, it was a very, it was kind of a magical place, really, from what my memories. And Swami, my father had spent a lot of time abroad in different places. He was in Canada, he was in Europe. He was in the US, and then he had come here, moving his family here. So when we came, Swami gave us a lot of attention. And my mother, in many of her attempts to discipline me, would always say that Swami knows everything. So you had the sense of Swami as almost kind of a magical, like a Santa Clausian figure, if you will, as a child. Right, because here was this being who knew everything about you.
Was that scary or empowering?
A little bit of both. A little bit of both. Because when you looked at Swami, Swami is very beautiful, right? And the figure is very appealing, just full of all these sort of inviting textures. His like curly hair, which felt like it was so fuzzy, and the soft robe and things like that. But at the same time, there was all the silence and all the different rules of the ashram and stuff, right? So it was a little bit of both. I'm probably jumping a little bit ahead here, but I think I was extremely attached to my mother, and I had no intention of joining the school. But Swami was very insistent that both of us kids be put into the primary school. My sister and I are about 5 years apart. And Swami was very insistent that we study in the primary school. And again, my abiding memory of the primary school, I remember taking the entrance exam. And although I was born in Canada and I grew up the first couple of years in Canada, I didn't know a single word of English. I knew Tamil, which was our native tongue. And so I couldn't I don't think I really cleared the entrance. I just kind of very blasé and nonchalantly went through it. But Swami kind of insisted that I be a part of the school. So these are all kind of part of, that time. And when I was put into the school, I remember, like many kids, just this whole thing of being ripped away from your parents, right? Everything was so new. I was like crying all the time. And the teachers at the school were very they became almost like a surrogate parent, right? Like our headmistress auntie, like till today, she's a very maternal figure to many of us, right? And so they kind of stepped into that role and had to play many different roles. It was not just as our teachers or, they had to play these kind of, really stepping into that kind of a role, a very parental role. And I used to constantly try to run away from the school because I just figured that if I came down the slope and you came to Darshan, and right here was SA17 where my parents were, you would be then. But I remember my father and my grandmother saying
So this great escape, did you plan it at any point in time?
Oh, many times. And I remember this one time I just came running down the slope very nonchalantly. And as I was coming down, our library auntie, she recently passed away. She and another teacher were climbing up the slope. And I was just walking down. And I figured that if I was confident enough, they wouldn't figure where I was trying to go. And then I just said, I'm just going to see my mother. And then they kind of just held my hand and walked me back up the slope. I didn't make it very far. But this was sort of, as a child, this was kind of that time. A little bit... I mean, there's the school on one hand, but then the sense that your family and, this whole magical world is just there, there was that whole sense as well. So, I mean, this was kind of...
What about your relationship with Bhagwan? As a 6-year-old, when you joined, how did you relate to this being, as you said, who would come on the sand? For me, it was like, I was there in 1984 in university when you joined. And my recollection is that Bhagwan would somewhat glide, this mystical, magical, strikingly beautiful and uniquely distinct looking being would glide on that with a slim frame on this sand and reach out to you. As a young student, how did you relate to him?
So...
if you can recall any interactions that you've had with Bhagwan in your
definitely.
childhood?
I think it must have been one of the early interviews that we got as a family. I still remember the whole atmosphere in the interview room. It was pretty charged because, first of all, there's this whole, you felt you were chosen, right? Because you would be called at random. And Swami called my father and then he'd said, call the family. And so somebody signaled to us and then all of us went along. It was my mother, my sister, my grandmother, and myself. So it's a family interview. And so in the interview room, this is, again, because my mother had always said, Swami knows everything. So I was kind of doing a quick mental audit of what was the last naughty thing that I did that I might get into trouble for. There was that sense. And then there was also the sense of anticipation and the sense of being very special, at that point, like that you were in for a very momentous thing. That awareness was there at that time. And so, anyways, and so we were in the main interview room, and then I remember Swami, he kind of waved his palm, and then he had something in his hand like this. And so he kind of held his fist this way. And my sister, Swami's very, the people intelligence of Swami is very striking, right? He didn't want my sister to kind of be left out. So he said, what is in my hand? And she was kind of a little bit of a smart cookie. So she kind of said, earrings. And then Swami said, the whole world is in my hand. And as a child, that was just a literal statement, right? You just believed that the whole world is in your hand. And then he took me onto his lap and he made her hold one. So he would materialize them as these threads. And he made
like a wire.
Like a wire.
Gold wire.
Like a gold, like a gold wire. And and the thing is, typically in our tradition, in most Indian traditions, I guess, children's ears are pierced by the time they're about a year old. But I had this very low threshold for pain and I would always raise the roof. So Swami had noticed that. And so he wanted to pierce my ears. So he actually pierced my ears and he used this thread and he said, no blood, no pain. And I was kind of wincing and it was right. There was no blood or pain because I was just, imagining that it would be there, waiting for it, and it wasn't there. And then he materialized a laddu, and it was like dripping with ghee. And he said, because in our culture, again, when you do that, the karna vedanam, right? That's the Sanskrit word for it. It's an important samskara. And you make something sweet and distribute it as prasad. So he gave that laddu. And my mother, I don't remember this particular thing, but my mother remembers it as being pretty warm and dripping with ghee. And he told everybody to share it. And then he said, make payasam and have, he said to the rest of the family. And so this was the thing, sitting on Swami's lap, having my ears pierced. These were the memories that kind of were there at that point and were told to me again and again. So I could remember, all of the intensity with which, that incident happened at that time. And Swami would talk to me. He would ask me my name. He would say, what's your name? I would answer in Tamil. And then he would ask me something in Tamil, and then I would reply again in English. And then he would say, I'm talking to you in Tamil, and you're saying something in English. I'm saying something in English, and you're saying something in Tamil. So it was just this very, almost like a very friendly elder in your family. Somebody... a kind household presence, that's the kind of way that I remember Swami as being a very small child. And then he, actually this locket he materialized for my mother. It was an Ashtalakshmi thing. And then he materialized an emerald set ring for my father. And then the thing is a locket with Shirdi Baba in front and Om the back for my sister. So he had something for everyone in the family.
Nice.
Yeah.
So from being this gift-giving Santa Claus,
right, exactly,
Claus-esque person in your life, as you grew from grade 1 up, how did your relationship or understanding of who Bhagwan was evolve?
Yeah, so this phrase, they say this about, the words of the Guru is like a mantram, right? And this word, this no blood, no pain, it kind of functioned almost like a talisman in my life. At various points in my life, I saw it play out. At the time, I may not have realized it in so keen a fashion, but in retrospect, it was like, oh, this is what he meant by this no blood, no pain, was not just kind of a throwaway statement. It actually worked as a charm. So what had happened was, for example, in the primary school, now first grade, I'm just going to fast forward to the 12th grade. And sometime around, I would say the January, February time frame.
Yeah, 1996.
Yeah, around that time, I had started to have these immobilizing joint pains. And nobody knew what the reason was. And the school authorities and no one knew basically what it was and what to attribute it to. So somebody had told my father that, so initially we went to a specialist in Bangalore, and the specialist first thought it was an orthopedic problem. But then it turns out that it wasn't. It was actually something related to the heart. It was something called rheumatic fever. Okay. It starts with sore throat, and then it progresses to the joints, and then the next thing is it affects the heart. So somebody told my father, Swami has built this super specialty. Why don't you take your daughter there? And at first my father was hesitant because he was always of the view that this was built for, people, those that are really needy and unfortunate, it's not for those of us who can afford it. But somebody said, no, sir, all of us are Swami's children. You shouldn't think of it in that way. And so he went to Whitefield at the time and gave a letter to Swami. And then this whole kind of contingent of school authorities, parental figures, myself, we all trooped back. Now, what's happened is, by now, it's the next week, the board exams are going to start. This is the 12th board exam, the life-defining board exam. And I was taken to, and Dr. Ramnath Iyer, I think he's still there.
Yes, very much so.
At the time, he was a young resident that was just starting. He was just, and he actually, and his team of doctors, they caught this. And they said that this is rheumatic fever. And they said, if you had come maybe a week later, if you'd come even a little later, it would have presented as a heart condition. And that I would have had to have heart surgery. So, but luckily it was caught in time. And they said, why? There's no reason why she should lose a whole year of school. So it was like the best, my sister, kind of the family, which she said, you have the best condition because she said, you're sick enough to get attention, but well enough to enjoy it. Because I was in the cardiac critical care unit, looking back. But
no surgery.
No surgery.
Thank God.
I had to be driven to the examination hall. I sat in the principal's office and gave my exam by myself.
VIP student.
Right, because I couldn't climb the stairs and all of that stuff. So, and then I was driven back to the hospital. And then my classmates would make periodic visits to the hospital, which was a fun trip for them too, because the hospital had just been built. And so they would come and visit me. So, it was it could have been an extremely harrowing situation, but it became this...
Like a picnic-like thing.
Essentially, right? And for some years after that, I had to be on some penicillin medication and stuff like that. But the theme was this no blood, no pain, right? There was no surgery. And, so I always, to me, that was, it struck me later that, oh my God, this is what's been functioning as a talisman in my life.
That is grace, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sometimes, the obvious ones, like you said, so he's actually materializing something or giving it to you. So those are the things that are very obvious, right? But then I think we have this word adrishtam, that is that which is not seen.
The subtle.
And the subtle that's behind, it's not so evident, but this is grace, right? What else can you call it?
So during the 12 years you were there, very impressionable, you went through your tweens and teens in the ashram and the school is attached to the ashram. There must have been many occasions when your batch or your group of friends had opportunity to interact with Swami or Swami gave advice to your batch. What are your fondest memories of that?
Yeah, our batch, we have a very a story that's very unique actually to our batch.
This is the batch that graduated high school in 1996.
Correct. So this is our 25th year.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a bit. But essentially, what had happened was there were a bunch of very good dancers and musicians, as there is in every batch. And in our particular batch...
You thought you were special.
Yeah, we thought we were special.
Of course.
But we had a very interesting story because what happened was, I think there was a particular program, I'm forgetting the exact details, but there was supposed to be all of these groups from different states in India, and they were supposed to have these like huge floats.
Yes.
Right?
I remember.
Right. And so...
in the Hillview Stadium.
Right. And Auntie, our headmistress, was she was trying to get our school to also have some kind of a representation.
Balvikas rally.
Yes, on one of those floats. So this was the idea in mind with which, she had started preparing a bunch of the students in my class for this kind of dance program. And they had started practice, and then, but at the last minute, I forget, for many reasons, primary school didn't end up having a presence on that float. So this group of children were kind of devastated that they couldn't, because they had prepared for it. But then they decided that they wouldn't give up hope. And we were all part of that. I mean, I myself wasn't part of that dance group, but, we were part of this very close-knit group of people. And so we knew all about their practices and all their trials and tribulations and what they were going through. This group of, this band decided that they were not going to give up because there were other opportunities throughout the academic year, right? There would be the sports meet. There would be, before that, there was Swami's birthday, right? They thought, come what may, in one of these things, they would be able to. So the next thing that they had in mind was for Swami's birthday. So they kept practicing and, they were really, it's kind of like athletes being in training, right? So they were doing everything they needed to do. Come birthday, what happened was that was the year when we had this huge, all of the BCCI, Bharat Cultural Integration, we had the world concerts, where all of these very prominent artists come to Parthi. And so guess what happened? I think their slot was taken by Dana Gillespie. So everybody is dressed up and waiting, and then neither primary school, and I think Vrindavan campus had also prepared something. Basically Swami's children didn't get a chance. It was the artists who had to be accommodated, who had come from, all over the country and all over the world. So, but you can imagine for a bunch of teenagers, that's devastating, right?
Crushed.
It reminds me a little bit of the Karate Kid movie, where it's the teacher is telling the students to, telling the student to repeatedly do something that seems meaningless, like, wax on and wax off the car or something that's very meaningless. And that student is getting frustrated, but it's actually that person is being trained for something else. It's some dynamic like that. So that happened. Swami's birthday was out of the question. The next time they wanted to present it was sometime during sports meet. Again, that was out of the question because this huge place at Shanti Vedika, and this was a small band of dancers. So finally, the only avenue left was prize distribution.
Oh.
And by then...
Sankranti time, January.
Correct. And that was only in the school. And the students were determined to do it. By then, our teachers had kind of lost hope. And they said, we're not going to, because they didn't want to be the people that caused you that disappointment, right? They set you up to do it and you're not able to do it. So they kind of took a back seat and said, if Swami asks you to do it, fine, but we're not going to be the ones that enable this. So, but this team, everybody got dressed and they were waiting, and Swami came, prize distribution, and we still, here's another little detail. So if you've been to the primary school, we have the old prayer hall, we have the new prayer hall, and then we have the dining hall. And they were told that it could be on any one of those three venues. So these girls would, in round robin, practice in all these three different venues. So, I mean, that's the seriousness with which they practiced for this thing.
And the agility.
Right? And they just didn't want to give up. And Swami actually said, who are all these people and what are they doing? And this was their chance. And so I remember the prayer hall was so packed, everybody had to like jam themselves back, and they performed it. And one of my classmates, she was just recounting when she had to do like a particular mudra, like literally this was Swami and this was her hand. It was this close to Swami.
So nice.
But the beauty of this whole thing is, think about this, right, for a second. If they had done it the original way, there'd have been a speck on a float somewhere.
This was up close and personal.
To Swami.
Yeah.
And word is that after this, Swami, Swami has this way of exaggerating the accomplishments of his students. He went and told somebody in Vrindavan that, I went to primary school and these kids performed this dance. It was the same dance that I performed with Rishendra Mani, and one of them lifted up the handkerchief with their eyelids or something. You remember that story? Swami actually said that that's what these kids did. So it was...
What enough validation.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it was a beautiful story of tough love in a sense, right? Because repeated disappointments, and finally they were still able to...
A lesson that must have come in handy many times in life, I bet you.
Right. So this is kind of this very unique thing that defined our kind of a batch. So, but in retrospect, taught all of us a lot of lessons, right? First of all, I guess those who ended up as artists, or kind of allied to the artistic field, you have to learn to repeatedly take rejection in life, right?
I think almost in many fields of life.
Right. Not just arts. Yeah.
And every delay is not a denial, really. You don't know something better around the corner that Swami is holding back, and he's preparing you for something bigger and better most of the time.
Right. So the promise that you do your bit and eventually, you'll... Right.
And trust his timing. It's so difficult at that moment. But
right.
In hindsight, it all makes sense.
Right.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, very much.
And any other, do you recall from your time here any instructions that Bhagwan gave to your school authorities, your headmistress ma'am or your warden ma'am, kitchen auntie, about your upkeep that impacted you?
Oh, yeah. There's lots of little things. So, for example, in the school... I mean, most of us who've gone to the school system know this. We would be served these sprouted moong beans, right? Yeah. Green moong, green grams. They would just call them green grams. And everybody hated it because it's not like, they would dress it up with lemon or salt or something. It'd just literally be green grams, sprouted green grams. There'd be a spoon. So Swami used to make surprise visits to the school. And he would just stand. By the way,
Swami had recommended those.
So that's you're coming. You've given out my punchline.
So sorry.
But that's okay. So what happens is Swami stands. He would stand with his hands behind his back and just watch everything. So he, this as one of the seniors, our seniors was being served. Swami made a face like, what is this? And she said, okay, this abomination is going to be, removed as of now. She said, Swami, this is green gram. Swami said, oh. And then he turns to teacher and says, very good. Give them 2 spoons. So,
instead of the one.
Yeah.
So the punishment was double.
Yeah, so he had this way of, seemingly he would lighten it up, but essentially he's trying to do what's good for you,
And
right?
that's a live plant-based protein that Bhagwan had recommended for the students. We
Right.
were so ahead of our times. Veganism, the term did not even exist at that time.
Yeah, that's true. Very, very much so. So there's all these like tiny little details, and he would make it a point. I think Darshan Day mornings, because you'd get up extra early, right? And you'd the whole school had to get up and get ready and have breakfast and then come to school. And
Come to Mandir.
come to Mandir, sorry, for Darshan. So he would make it a point to always come and say, "Kya khaya?" Like, what did you eat? And then somebody would say noodles. Sometimes they would make noodles in the morning, whatever they could make quickly, right, for the school. And Swami would say, he'd make up like a disgusted face and say, "Purugulu tintava?" Like, are you eating worms? And which struck a chord with many of the students also,
Just
right?
amuse the children.
Right. And then he would say, or some days it'd be bhaji, right? And then he'd say, "Bhaji, itna bada. Like he'd make the sign. How big was it? Like, is it really tiny or is it big? That sort of a thing.
Those are the vegetable fritters, right?
Right. Yeah. And then I think one of our seniors,
So relatable, no?
very relatable.
Like a grandma. Who would have thought as a child, the person speaking to you is who we now know he is, right?
Right.
Such a mundane detail that Bhagwan went into.
Very. And I remember one of our seniors, she had cut, the style was to have like these kind of bangs
Yeah.
across your forehead, right? And he would say something like, "Hey, Dharmavaram Jatka," which is like this horse-drawn thing.
Carriage, yeah.
And the
And the
horses
horse
would
has
have
the
this
bangs, right?
But these seem very thing, but in retrospect, it's like a profound thing on vanity and things like that, right? And I remember my sister. My sister was a very good dancer, and at one point, somehow Swami, in an interview, she said to Swami that she wanted to pursue dance, and she, thought that Swami would say something profound about Nataraja or something. And Swami said, "Good, it's good for weight loss." Swami, so it was very, very earthy. Swami had this very earthy
And
sense
so
of humor,
witty, quick.
and very witty, and very real, like what you needed at that time, right?
Yeah.
For your.
Very nice. So your batch finished grade 12 in 1996, and it's 25 years since.
Mm-hmm.
So this special batch of extraordinarily talented musicians and dancers, what does it mean to you, and what are you preparing in this regard?
So just similar to last year, this year has been a particularly challenging year because of the pandemic.
Yes, understandably.
So I don't want to give away too much, but we've been told to have two kinds of offerings. One, a virtual one, and one
In person.
In person. So we've kind of we've tried to be sort of the IKEA of script. We've tried to make it very modular terms of everything we want to do. So one of the things in terms of the topics that we were also thinking is many of our batchmates are also on the front lines of the fight against the pandemic. So
Some real life heroes and heroes.
Yes, absolutely. A friend of mine, a batchmate, she is a pulmonologist in New York City, actually. And so she has some wonderful stories, some very harrowing and some very, heartwarming. And so there's been a whole swath of different kinds of stories that have been swirling through our batch. So all of these are sort of going to inform what we end up doing as a part of our gratitude offering, which is usually done, I guess, on the 31st of December. Yeah, so there's definitely something to look forward to, I'm hoping.
So Janani, growing up for 12 years of your life here, I'm sure it impacted you in more ways than you were aware of. When you went on outside of the ecosystem of Prasanthi Nilayam, first to a college associated with the Bangalore University, then to a business school associated with the University of Toronto, and then you pursued banking for 17 years. Through this period, how did being a Sai student impact your life choices, your priorities, and was it difficult to follow your own heart and your conscience?
I would say initially, my first 3 years in Bangalore were much more difficult than all the years I spent abroad in a way.
Really? Surprising?
Surprisingly. I think it's because of the culture shock in some ways, because especially our school, we were extremely protected. It was kind of a hermetically sealed environment where all your decisions were in a way made for you. You just had to follow it and you'd be fine. I know you may have felt rebellious within those confines, but it was mostly decisions that were made for you and you had to just follow through.
So there was a very structured life.
Very structured. It was kind of being in a fenced garden, if you will, right?
Yes.
And from that, having to step out into the world where, you have to make different choices. Even simple choices, be it about food or the way you dress or things like that.
Was it confusing for you?
Initially, yes, it was. Confusing in the sense that, trying to just... it's almost like trying to find your balance, if you will, like trying to find your footing, if you will. So there was a sense of that. But quickly, especially when I went abroad and those years, I actually did my MBA while I was working. So many of the things that I learned in the school, because I was the first batch of something called the morning MBA. So the program would start at 6 a.m. and then I had a full day of work. So a
lot of multitasking.
Yeah, some of those things came in handy, like the years of waking up early and then, going one after the other, that sort of thing. Those things came in handy. But I think the sense of freedom that comes from being deeply anchored to something so much larger than yourself, I think that kind of stayed with me throughout. So, for example, if there are, say office events or whatever, things that involve, maybe in many office settings, they'd have things with alcohol or things like that. And there was no, you didn't even have to think twice before you made a choice that that's not something that was for you, right?
Did you feel left out?
No, I can't say I did, because Swami would always tell us, if you cannot oblige, speak obligingly, right? So you knew how to handle the situation. So you're not rejecting it out of fear or out of hatred or something. It's just not something that works for you. And when you understand that, you can be much more collegial with your colleagues. You can still make fun. And in fact, I remember my colleagues used to say, oh, you should come to these events with us because they'd give you these drink tickets and we can get yours. So, it's just having the sense of lightness and sense of humor. Because the great thing about Swami, and I think this was the part that was unconscious that we imbibed, was he didn't really have a formula. He just dealt with everybody who came to him, right? Like film stars and
politicians, and farmers, poor people, rich people.
And he was just this great equalizer. Whoever it was, he was one-on-one with them. He was fully present. And I think the sense of kind of being fully present in every situation, I think that was something that really helped. And this whole sense of, I think there's, especially being in a business school and stuff, there's this whole sense of being, having a very careerist focus, even for your career. But I think Swami helped me, or the education that we went through, consciously or unconsciously, helped, at least for me, make the distinction between a career versus an occupation, right? And
Elaborate, please.
So, I mean, being gainfully occupied in a way that you contribute to society does not necessarily have to come with titles or accolades or money.
I completely second that.
Right.
Because that's what we do in Sri Sathya Sai Vidya Vahini.
Right. So
yes, you can volunteer and do something very meaningful without having to worry about the corporate race. But what about the paycheck?
Right. I mean, I believe that one need not have to grasp it so harshly, right? You do your job.
Bills to pay.
Right. But you I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can't say from within my circle of people that anybody that I know has struggled has had to do some extraordinary things outside of their comfort zone, or against their values and against their principles to make a paycheck, right? So you could still, you could balance those two. It's not, they're not mutually exclusive, right? So that's what I feel. There's just a sense of playfulness and a sense of, you don't have to grip something so harshly, like I need it at any cost kind of a thing. You can just kind of, life is a game, play it sort of a thing. Just take it lightly, do your best, you get something. Okay, it may work, it may not work, but you move on. You don't kind of let it define you or let it, bog you down.
Mm-hmm.
In that sense.
So during the 17 years that you were working with the leading Canadian bank as a banker in Canada, were you ever in a position of conflict in your values?
I can't say. I can't say that I was, but I could have been. As in, I could anticipate situations, where I may have been in this. So, for example, I had lots of colleagues they had this whole thing that, especially in North America, in a capitalist economy, they would say that you have to demand promotions or you have to demand raises. But I remember Swami always telling us that never ask for stuff, like never, be in a situation where you're kind of begging for stuff, or he taught us to have this sort of confidence. And I can say this throughout my career, I've never actually asked for something, right? I've been assertive and clear about what it is that I have delivered to something, or the role that I have played, but I've never actually said, hey, I need a bigger raise because so-and-so had this raise, or I need a promotion because so-and-so had this promotion, or I've been here for this much time. And that's something that has been noticed both by my peers in a positive way. Mm-hmm. It's been noticed and it's been recognized. So people, you may not get like a straight ascent, but you go sort of like a spiral, right? You move across the organization, you make friends, you make connections. It's been about 5 years now since I quit my bank job when I moved to Princeton. But even now, I can pick up the phone and call some of my colleagues, and it's as if I've never left. So I have that kind of a connection with people. And
very nice. What you say resonates with what I recently read about Indra Nooyi mentioning in her autobiography, that she never felt comfortable asking for a raise. Now that raised a lot of controversy because a lot of people said you can afford to say that. But I think it's a cultural thing also. Many of us may not feel comfortable kind of demanding it. And I think that sobriety and restraint was reinforced by Swami, because we always knew that whatever you do is known to him.
Right. And this whole karmanyeva adhikar is there, right? Ma phaleshu kadashana.
Do your best,
you have
and
to,
don't get fixated on your results, right?
Right. Like you said, some of it may be cultural conditioning, but Swami, I think in his, and again, probably I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but in what he viewed, envisioned for women, for example, right, was not necessarily the command and control type of management style that is seen to be something, that should be the natural choice. There are ways in which you can influence from a place of like inner authority by your own, by your behavior, by kind of the soft skills. And nowadays, there's a lot of literature and stuff which is kind of leaning into that kind of stuff too, right? Recognizing the different strengths. You don't have to actually kind of shout to the top of your voice, or have a particular, like I said, like a command and control kind of a thing. You can be quietly assertive.
Speaking of which, what are your thoughts on the role of women leaders in the Sri Sathya Sai mission?
I have this interesting thing. I remember when the first Ladies' Day happened in Parthi. I was I was probably in the 9th standard, I think. I was in 11th, I think, at the time. But I remember being in my teenage mind, I was quite kind of offended in a way by the whole thing, because I felt, why only on this day? Why can't every day be a day that ladies are given importance or ladies are given prominence and things like that? And so I used to kind of mentally, I would just shut Ladies' Day out of my mind. So what happens is, fast forward many years later, when I was in Toronto, I was actually invited to be a speaker for Ladies' Day. And so it was a funny thing for me, because I had to go back and read all the discourses of the ladies that Swami spoke on Ladies' Day, and like really go through it with a fine-tooth comb and see, okay, what is it that Swami's vision really was? What was his view of the role of women? And again, as characteristic with Swami, he was always an innovator from within the tradition. He was not the person that would bring down the house.
Not a disruptive model.
Right? He is not a disruptive innovator in any sense. He's always someone who works within the tradition and then And so he speaks about this sort of a thing. about first of all, this whole notion of the world itself. I mean, God is Purusha and the whole world is Prakriti, right? Everything is a reflection of creation. And in that sense, right there's a slight, you can see like the gender roles kind of bending, in Swami's vision of it. So and then from there he would go on to say that the roles that men and women play, they are for the benefit of society, right? So at every given time, he would say it's not that women should not work outside the home, or it's not that women should not have positions of authority, but he would say that the family unit as a basic building block of society, to strengthen that, what is it that women need to do? In other words, Swami was not very prescriptive. That was my reading of the whole thing. Swami is not extremely prescriptive saying do this or don't do that. It's more a sense of what is it that works to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts, right? That was kind of his, at least that was my reading, what I gleaned from his.
So Janani, you were very blessed. 12 glorious years at the lotus feet, ability to talk to Swami, touch his lotus feet, hear him speak, and perform for him. But these schools or educational institutions that Swami has built, these are his living legacies, and they will go on forever and ever. Batches and batches of students will come here. Children who are yet to be born will have the opportunity to study here. But none of them are going to have that privilege of connecting with the Lord personally. What would you tell those children who are currently studying here or have come to the fold, are yet to come to the fold of Sathya Sai education system, and the founder of this entire beautiful education system is not physically available to them? What would be your message to them?
So in a way, I would actually say in some ways they are lucky in a different way. Because for them, their perception of their experience of Swami is not confined to the 5'3" form that we knew. And in fact, from say 1984 to 1996, you could see the change. Swami got busier and busier. So initially, he'd come to school all the time. I would say on average, at least once a month, he'd make a surprise visit. And then as the years grew by, it became much more sporadic. And by the time I left the school, he'd just come for prize distribution. At the most, maybe during sports meet, there'd be the odd practice where he'd just drop in to see what we were doing, right? So you can see the number of visits, like physical visits to the school, reduced by a lot. It was similar with...
But you had twice a week darshans and all festival days in the mandir.
Right.
Priority
Absolutely.
seating. So, those were huge deals all the same.
Those were huge deals, and they're huge deals, especially now when you're outside. But as a child, it was pretty taxing to sit there for hours on end, right? We would try to do our homework or things like that. But those were pretty challenging. So I guess the main thing is I feel like the incoming batches of students who are coming here for a particular experience, I think that they should kind of internalize that they're somehow missing out on something, right? Because they're living in a very unique time too. And Swami's presence, his love, and that's what's created all of this, right? This setup, this organization, these schools and these teachers. That's a living, breathing thing. And I don't think you should tie it to the physical form, right? There are so many ways. Like, for example, I mean, if I think of my own self, so this trip, this time when I came to India, it was just like a 20-day trip. I hadn't planned either on this Radio Sai thing, or even with our many of our batchmates, we met and to do some of the recording for our year-end program. But it just so happened that we ended up sitting in Whitefield. We were in the Sai Ramesh hall. It was just us. And it was this huge, beautiful hall. And we were just sitting there and we were practicing Vedam. And I had this moment of it was just pure, it was kind of surreal. And I was thinking, wait a minute, this is it. This is the moment. It's not the recording or the presentation. It is this sense right here of just being in this very peaceful place, sitting in the Sanidhyam, right, by the Trai and chanting this. So I think that's what future batches will experience as well. It's the sense of being present in this very timeless space, right? That's what they'd have to carry. Because at the end of the day, yes, we had those interactions with Swami. Yes, he was there, but those were still fleeting. The rest of the time, you had to do what you had to do. You had to go through the academic year. You had to face all the challenges that you had to face. You had to do everything you need to do as a student. So I think if they held on to the sense that, oh, we don't have what they had, then they're going to lose out on all the other stuff that they could, gain from this sort of an education. And because it is something special. I'm not saying it's not without its challenges, right? Because especially growing up, I mean, I don't even know if the current generation would understand the paradigm of being without a cell phone or being without this constant connectivity, right? But those were challenges. You had to, like, sometimes you had to wake up in the morning and take a cold water bath if you ran out of hot water. It was like being, all those physical challenges. And then, sometimes you were homesick. You did miss your parents. You had all these different challenges, right? But, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, kind of a thing. It also shaped you in some ways. In the Western paradigm, it's like being in summer camp or scouts camp for a long time. Boot camp sometimes, right? So in that sense...
we call it the Gurukul system.
Right,
in the Indian
system.
Culture.
Yeah, 12 years is a standard length of time that one goes through the Gurukul system, right? So I don't think that the current batches... of incoming students, if they're coming here for this experience, that they should feel they lack it in any way. I don't think they should.
Final thoughts? Who is Bhagwan Sri Sathya Sai Baba for you?
So I always call Swami my Kurma Guru and a Zen master.
What is a Kurma Guru?
So a Kurma Guru, I came across this notion, it's in the Guru Charitram and in the Sacharita as well. So the mother tortoise doesn't actually physically touch its young, but just by its netra diksha, just by its eyes, it takes care of it. So I feel that Swami... Loving glances. Swami in that sense is a Kurma Guru. Because I was telling you about this no blood, no pain. I had a third part to this where... it was the year 2005, 2006. And I was driving from Toronto to Ithaca, upstate New York, across the border. So it was like a 4 or 5 hour journey. And I kind of had a car accident. And my car kind of toppled a couple of times and it was crushed. And I had to be taken out with the jaws of life and then flown to a hospital and stuff like that. But luckily, nothing happened to me, not even a scratch. And it was this no blood, no pain as a theme.
You seem to have this insurance policy.
Right. So this is why I
Full protection.
This is why I say he's the Kurma Guru, right? Yeah. He's always been functioning in my life. His words as a talisman and his glance, even though this is why I keep saying, I tell all my friends, I've met people, who say, oh, you're so lucky you went through the system. And I always say, no, don't feel that you're not lucky. If you believe in the divinity and the Kurma Guruness, of Swami, then no matter where you were, you went through the same system, right? It's nice to feel special and exclusive, but at the same time, everybody is all of us are his children, right? And that's the consciousness that I think that's my greatest takeaway from Swami.
Very nice. Janani Srinivasan, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and feelings for Bhagwan with all of us.
Thank you very much.
Sai Ram.